It started off like any other day in my quiet suburban neighborhood. Birds chirping, kids biking past, and the occasional lawnmower humming in the distance. I'd lived here for years, nestled between two friendly families who respected each other's space and privacy. It was peaceful, predictable. That is, until Karen moved in. At first, I didn't think much of it. People come and go. But within days, I noticed something that would soon spiral into an ongoing battle of frustration and absurdity. She kept parking her car directly in front of my driveway. Not beside it, not near it, directly across the one spot I needed clear every single day. At first, I chalked it up to a mistake. Maybe she didn't realize it was my driveway, but when it happened again, and again, I knew it wasn't accidental. Each time, I found myself either trapped in or blocked out of my own home. No apologies, no acknowledgement. Just that same smug car, perfectly angled like it belonged there. I tried everything, notes, door knocks, patience, but Karen didn't care. And so, what started as a neighborly misunderstanding became a full-blown battle of stubbornness. But she had no idea who she was messing with. I had a plan, a toll booth. Karen wasn't your typical neighbor, she made sure of that. From the moment she moved in, it was as if the entire street had been blessed, or cursed, with her presence. She had a voice that could cut through double-paned windows, a wardrobe that screamed attention, and a car that seemed magnetically drawn to other people's property. But above all, Karen had something else, an unshakable sense of entitlement. She acted like the world was her driveway, and everyone else was just lucky to exist in it. I first officially met her when I was walking back from the mailbox and noticed her silver SUV parked directly in front of my driveway again. I smiled and introduced myself, hoping a friendly face-to-face chat might solve the issue. But instead of an apology or even acknowledgement, she looked at me like I had interrupted royalty. "Oh, I'm just here for a minute," she snapped, waving me off as if I were a child. That minute turned into hours more than once. She'd disappear into her house or drive off in someone else's car, leaving her own behind like a landmine in my path. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she didn't understand how much trouble it caused. I couldn't pull in after long work days. I missed a grocery delivery once. Even the garbage truck skipped my pickup because they couldn't access the bins. But Karen didn't care. She acted as though the driveway was part of public property and parking there was her unspoken right. When I left notes under her windshield wiper, kindly worded, even polite, she crumpled them and threw them into my yard. I saw it with my own eyes one afternoon while sipping coffee by the window. The worst part was how smug she looked every time she did it, like she was daring me to do something about it. She had that exaggerated sense of self-assurance that made confrontation feel useless, as if any resistance would only fuel her to escalate further. Other neighbors started to whisper about her too. One even joked that she was trying to claim the entire block. I wasn't the only one fed up, but I was the only one directly targeted. And if Karen wanted to keep playing this game, she was about to discover that I could play too, on a whole new level. At first, I clung to the hope that reason would win. That maybe, just maybe, Karen's behavior was the result of a misunderstanding rather than malice. I figured a few respectful conversations would clear things up. The first time I approached her, I tried to keep things light. I mentioned the blocked driveway, smiled and said I understood how street parking could get tricky. She didn't smile back. In fact, she barely looked up from her phone before muttering, "It's not a big deal, I'm not hurting anyone." And just like that, she walked away, leaving me standing there mid-sentence. Still, I didn't give up. I wrote a brief, non-confrontational note and slipped it under her windshield, gently explaining how her parking was causing real problems. The next morning, I found that same note shredded and scattered on my front lawn like confetti. It was hard not to take that personally. The next time it happened, I tried again, this time attaching the note to a bright yellow envelope to make it more noticeable. She responded by honking her horn repeatedly in front of my house at 7 in the morning. I stepped outside, and she grinned like it was some kind of private joke. I even reached out to the local HOA, but they brushed it off, saying it was a civil matter and not within their jurisdiction. My driveway was technically mine, but the curb space in front of it wasn't something they regulated. It felt like I was trapped in a bureaucratic no-man's land where basic courtesy had no enforcement. Other neighbors began to sympathize. Some even offered to speak to her on my behalf, but Karen didn't care what anyone thought. She seemed to thrive on the annoyance she caused. Every effort to resolve things peacefully only seemed to amuse her more. She treated my complaints like background noise, an inconvenience at most. Eventually, I began taking pictures. I documented every incident with time-stamped photos and even started recording video clips when I could. It wasn't about revenge, it was about building a case. Because if Karen wasn't going to respect my space, then I needed something stronger than politeness. I needed a plan that would make her think twice before putting her car anywhere near my property again. Something bold, something she wouldn't see coming. It was a Wednesday morning when everything finally snapped. I had an important meeting across town, one that had taken weeks to schedule. A potential promotion was on the line. I got up early, dressed sharp, grabbed my briefcase, and headed for the door, feeling cautiously optimistic. But as soon as I stepped outside, my stomach sank. There it was again. Karen's silver SUV, gleaming in the morning sun, planted firmly across the mouth of my driveway like a steel wall. I stood there for a moment, stunned. I checked the time. I had exactly 40 minutes to make it across the city in rush hour traffic. My hands were already shaking, and not just from the caffeine. I knocked on her door, twice. No answer. I called her name, pounded louder, but nothing. Her house was silent. She wasn't coming out. Not today. I sprinted to a neighbor's driveway and begged to borrow their car, which thankfully wasn't blocked. I made it to the meeting with seconds to spare, sweating through my shirt and rattled beyond belief. The meeting itself? A disaster. I couldn't focus. My nerves were shot. All I could think about was that SUV and the woman who treated my home like a public parking lot. When I got back home, Karen's car was gone, as if it had never been there. And something inside me just snapped. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was done. Done playing nice, done hoping she'd suddenly develop empathy, done relying on useless channels to fix something that clearly no one else was going to deal with. That moment, sitting on my porch, staring at the empty space she'd left behind, was the exact point I realized that if I wanted change, I'd have to make it happen myself. So I started thinking, not out of anger, but out of strategy. I wasn't going to yell, I wasn't going to vandalize, I was going to outthink her. I needed a solution that was clever, lawful, and impossible to ignore, one that would hit her right where she felt invincible. I pulled out a notepad, sat at my kitchen table, and started sketching ideas. It began as a joke, really, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If Karen wanted to treat my driveway like a paid spot, then maybe it was time she actually paid for it. A toll booth? Why not? At first, the idea seemed ridiculous. A toll booth in front of my own driveway? Who does that? But the more I thought about it, the more it made a strange kind of sense. Karen clearly thought she had a right to park wherever she wanted, so why not flip the script? If she was going to treat my private access like public infrastructure, then I'd play along. Only this time, there'd be consequences, and a price tag. I spent that evening sketching designs on a napkin, like some sort of caffeinated city planner. It didn't have to be elaborate, just convincing enough to make a statement. The next day, I visited a local hardware store and picked up the essentials: plywood boards, reflective stickers, orange cones, a high-visibility vest, some caution tape, and a cheap security camera decal. I even found an old cash drop box from a garage sale, the kind that bolted down and had a slot for envelopes. It was perfect. I mounted it onto a wooden post and painted a bold sign to hang over it. Driveway access toll, $50, violators will be towed, in thick black letters. I built the whole thing over a weekend, working early mornings and late evenings so Karen wouldn't catch on. I anchored the plywood into a freestanding frame that could sit right on the curb whenever I needed it. No nails into public property, no digging into the ground, completely movable and totally legal. I double-checked local ordinances and property maps. Turns out the edge of the driveway was indeed part of my lot, and as long as I didn't obstruct pedestrian pathways or alter the street itself, I wasn't technically breaking any rules. By Sunday night, it was finished. A homemade toll booth, not large, not flashy, but eye-catching and undeniably official-looking. I even added a small LED light on the top to give it a blinking effect at night, powered by a portable battery. The final touch? a fake camera mounted just above the sign with a red blinking light, the kind that made people second-guess everything. When I stood back and looked at it, I couldn't help but laugh. It looked absurd, but it also looked like something you didn't want to mess with. When I rolled it out the next morning and positioned it right in front of my driveway, I felt a strange mix of pride and anticipation. This wasn't revenge, it was creative enforcement. I wasn't yelling, wasn't vandalizing, wasn't escalating. I was simply matching her entitlement with structured absurdity. The ball was in her court now. If Karen wanted to park in front of my driveway again, she was going to have to think twice. And if she didn't, well, let's just say I was more than ready. When I unveiled the toll booth on Monday morning, it didn't take long for the neighborhood to notice. By the time I'd returned from my walk with the dog, 3 different people had already stopped to take pictures. One couple even asked if it was real. I just smiled and said, "Depends on who's asking." Word traveled fast. Within hours, the toll booth had become the talk of the street. Some thought it was a joke, others thought it was brilliant, and a few quietly thanked me for finally doing something bold about the Karen problem we'd all been silently suffering through. What surprised me most was how quickly the booth shifted the tone of the entire block. People were stopping to chat, sharing stories of their own run-ins with Karen, laughing over my creative solution. It became a sort of landmark, a rallying point for the community's collective frustration. Even the mailman gave me a nod of approval. "About time someone did something," he said, chuckling as he dropped off my letters. Karen, however, didn't seem amused. That afternoon, she came barreling down the street in her SUV and slammed on the brakes when she saw the structure sitting neatly at the foot of my driveway. She sat there for a few seconds, just staring at it, as if trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Then she slowly rolled past, not stopping, not saying a word, just driving on to park further down the block. I watched the whole thing from my porch, pretending to sip coffee while quietly savoring the moment. The next day, though, she tested me. Around noon, I found her SUV parked half a foot into the same spot, just enough to be annoying but not enough to trigger towing. This time, I left her a different kind of message. I printed a photo of her car from one of my recordings and wrote across it in red marker. "License plate has been recorded, towing scheduled on next offense." I slipped it under her windshield and walked away. That was the first time I felt a shift. She was no longer smirking, no eye rolls, no sarcastic remarks, just silence. She didn't knock on my door. She didn't park there again that week. For the first time since she moved in, Karen looked uncertain, and that in itself was a small but satisfying victory. It was a Friday afternoon when the storm finally rolled in, both literally and figuratively. Clouds hung low, casting a dull grey light over the street, and the air felt heavier than usual. I was in the garage sorting through old boxes when I heard the unmistakable screech of tires and the slamming of a car door. Moments later, Karen came stomping up my driveway like she was ready to declare war. Her face was flushed, lips tight, and she was waving one of my printed notices in the air like it was a personal insult. "You've gone too far," she barked before I could even say a word. "What is this ridiculous booth? You think you can fine me for using public space?" She gestured toward the toll booth like it had personally offended her. I kept calm, wiped my hands on a rag, and leaned against the doorframe, refusing to rise to the bait. "That's not public space," I said, keeping my tone even. "That's the entrance to my private driveway, and the booth is a deterrent. You know, since polite requests didn't seem to work." She scoffed, laughing a little too loudly, the kind of laugh people use when they feel cornered but don't want to admit it. "This is harassment," she snapped. "I've already called the city. I'll have it taken down, and if you keep leaving these creepy notes on my car, I'll report you." Her voice was shrill now, teetering between fury and desperation. I pointed to the camera decal on the booth and smiled. "Everything's being documented. Feel free to report anything you like. I'd be happy to show the city all the photos and videos of your car blocking my driveway. Over 20 instances, all with timestamps." Her eyes narrowed. The confidence she usually carried seemed to falter. She opened her mouth, then shut it again. For once, she had no clever comeback. She stood there for a few seconds longer, breathing hard, trying to figure out her next move. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and marched back to her car. No yelling, no final insult. Just silence and retreat. I didn't cheer, I didn't gloat. I just stood there, watching her drive away, knowing that the message had finally landed. This wasn't about winning a petty war. It was about standing your ground when someone decides your space doesn't matter. And now she knew it did. The following Monday, I noticed something different. Karen's SUV wasn't anywhere in sight. For a moment, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, she had decided to change her ways. But as the day stretched on, I spotted it parked halfway down the block in front of someone else's house. It was as if she had surrendered her usual spot but couldn't resist staying close enough to make a point. I didn't say anything. I let it ride. After all, her absence from my driveway was already a win in my book, but that fragile truce didn't last long. 2 days later, I came home from running errands to find her car parked right back in front of my driveway, squarely behind the toll booth like it was daring me to do something. No note, no explanation, just that smug SUV gleaming under the afternoon sun. It was the final straw. I made a quick call to the towing company I'd been in contact with. I had already filed a report, logged dates and pictures, and confirmed I was within my rights. The dispatcher didn't hesitate. 20 minutes later, a flatbed truck rolled in, and within minutes, Karen's car was up on the lift and being towed off the street. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with a mix of disbelief and satisfaction. A few neighbors watched from their windows, one of them even giving me a quiet thumbs up. Karen showed up an hour later, furious and red-faced, shouting about theft and illegal towing. But this time, I didn't even engage. I simply handed her the copy of the towing form and pointed out the warning signs she had ignored. Twice. She stormed off again, this time headed straight for the impound lot. The fallout was swift. Not only did she have to pay a hefty fee to recover her car, but she was also slapped with a citation from the city after I submitted my footage to the HOA, who decided to finally get involved. They issued her a warning about repeated neighborhood disruptions. She stopped parking near my property after that. No more excuses, no more shouting, just silence and distance. For the first time in months, I could leave my house without checking for obstacles or holding my breath. It felt like a victory, not just for me, but for every quiet neighbor who's ever dealt with someone who thought the rules didn't apply to them. Justice, as it turned out, came on 4 wheels and a tow hook. In the days that followed, something changed in the neighborhood. The tension that had lingered like a fog started to lift. People began to smile a little more when they passed my house. I even caught a few giving the toll booth a subtle nod, like it had become some kind of local symbol for quiet resistance. Karen, on the other hand, kept her distance. Her SUV never came within 3 houses of mine again. She no longer stormed around with her usual air of superiority. Instead, she moved like someone who had finally realized they weren't invincible. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The peace spoke for itself. I kept the toll booth up for a while, mostly as a deterrent, but also because it had taken on a personality of its own. People took selfies with it. One neighbor even joked about installing one in front of their recycling bins. It was ridiculous, yes, but it worked. And in a world where common courtesy had seemingly vanished, that little plywood booth reminded people that respect still mattered. Eventually, I rolled it back into the garage, dismantled most of it, and left the sign hanging on the wall as a souvenir. Life returned to normal. I could back out of my driveway without a second thought. My mail wasn't trampled. Deliveries showed up without issue. The simple freedom of coming and going as I pleased had returned, and with it, a deep sense of relief. Karen never apologized, but I didn't need her to. Her silence and absence were apology enough. And while I wouldn't wish neighborhood drama on anyone, I did learn something important through it all. When patience fails, creativity speaks louder. You don't have to shout to stand your ground. Sometimes you just need a toll booth. If you've ever dealt with a neighbor like Karen, you know just how exhausting it can be to fight for basic respect. Sometimes the only way to get through to someone is with a little creativity and a lot of persistence. I hope my story made you laugh, maybe even inspired you to take a stand in your own way. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, Subscribe for more wild, real-life stories, and drop your own neighbor nightmare or petty revenge tale in the comments. I'd love to read what you've been through.